There are very specific difficulties in coping with a very large cast. For a start, if all the performers turned up at once, where would one put them? The dressing room certainly couldn't cope with everybody at the same time. And if the house is going to be pretty full in terms of audience, then everybody all together makes a big deal. There were many occasions on that rehearsal when I inadvertently put my foot in it. Usually because I wasn't used to dealing with things of the armed forces, or for that matter, the church. Most of the entertainment items went quite smoothly in rehearsal because the performers had had opportunity to rehearse their bits in their own places of practice. It was the occasions when everything had to be united that caused the problems, or the laughter. There was one wonderful moment when we were rehearsing the remembrance part of the evening, when I assumed that the young airman who was going to play the last post on his cornet was right at the top of the opera house at the back of the gallery. I'm told I have a voice that could quell a riot at 100 yards, if I had to, and using that voice, I bawled across the theatre that we were ready for him to try the last post. Whereupon a very charming young man, standing to my left, leant forward and said, "Ma'am, I'm here." The company in the audience that was my own company thought that was just wonderful. In fact, he never did get to practice the last post, because at that moment the ominous sound of a big bass drum being played some distance away permeated the theatre. Usually, when there is a performance, audiences arrive in dribs and drabs in the half an hour or so between the house opening and the show starting. But on this occasion, the plan was that all the audience would gather in the pavilion gardens, and they would be led in procession by the various bands that were playing in the concert. You can hear bass sounds from a long way away, and the bass drum that I could hear was indicative of the fact that the procession was getting ready to move towards the theatre. Rehearsal time was over. The show was about to start. There was a frantic tidying up of the stage, which wasn't easy because there were orchestra stands and goodness knows what else in the way of props everywhere. And I suddenly realised that I was still wearing what I'd been wearing since the crack of dawn, a tracksuit type garment whose only virtue was comfort, and that at some point during the evening I was supposed to make an appearance on stage. Fortunately, my husband Peter and I own a house that's near the theatre, and my long-suffering fella was sent to find the evening dress that I had hung in readiness to change, not having a clue that I wouldn't have time to go back home and change properly. People who've worked in the theatre, especially musical theatre, for years, think nothing much of changing in the wings. Composers have an unerring habit of assuming that one can change from one garment to another in 4 bars of music and then you're on again. So I removed my tracksuit and put my evening dress on in the wings. And only after I had successfully effected this change did I glance up and realise that the masking in the theatre on that day was not great, and that there was a perfect sight line between where I was standing and the main box in the theatre, where Winifred Hilton was sitting next to, I think, the Archbishop of Westminster. Either they're both short-sighted, or they're both much too polite to register any sort of distress at what they might have seen. Either way, I got away with it. You will notice that I didn't say Sir Peter was in the box, and that was because, although he had been one of the prime movers and shakers of the whole event, he sadly had died, and for a while we thought the event wouldn't happen. But indeed the opposite occurred. The title, tribute and promise applied to the way the people of Derbyshire felt about him, and so, far from diminishing the occasion, he and his memory enhanced it. It looked, therefore, as though we were going to be up and running and all would be well. And we were into the second half when my mentor tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Ma'am, the colour parties are at the stage door." Not knowing what he meant by the colour parties, I said, "Oh," and he said, "I think you should come." So I went to the stage door, and in Water Street, which is next to the theatre, there were what seemed like hundreds of people, probably 30 or so, of every size, shape and uniform milling around. The colour parties. My ADC said, "What do you want me to do with them?" That was an unfortunate question, because I might have invented a less than gracious answer. And I said, "Well, whatever they did this morning." And he said, "Well, they weren't here this morning." "Why not?" said I. "Well, they weren't mustered," he said. Yes, well, they may not have been mustered, but they were supposed to be in the performance. And apparently they were supposed to accompany the standards. And you will remember we'd already had a fun and games about getting the standard bearers from the auditorium to the stage into the new tableau. At that point, I decided to let diplomacy fly to the wings, and I exercised a degree of authority, which I can do because I was head of a very large comprehensive school for a lot of years. And I said, without any concession to size, status, affiliation, gender or rank, I want one line on this street now, from small to tall to small. Go. And they did. You may not be familiar with the phrase small to tall to small. It's a trick that choreographers and sergeant majors use when they wish to give the impression of a straight line where everyone is the same height. Of course, everyone is not the same height, and if you want a line to look funny, you muddle it up so the very tallest is next to the shortest and the thinnest next to the fattest, etc., etc. Small to small, or sometimes tall to small to tall, gives an impression of a continuity of height. If you ever watch the Trooping of the Colour, have a look. The uniformity that was achieved in no term flat was just astounding. And my guide and mentor even chose to move a couple of people slightly because it was his gesture of being helpful. Now, when you do that, you have to pray that the smallest and the tallest are people with considerable nous and quick on the uptake. And in this situation, the two smallest, albeit uniformed, were Cub Scouts, aged about perhaps 7. I go to one of them and I say, "In a moment I will show you the way onto the back of the stage. You are to lead this line up the steps onto the stage, across the back of the stage, and you are stop when you are level with the microphone that you will see protruding from the orchestra pit near the wings. Got that?" And this little boy looked at me and solemnly said, "Roger that, ma'am," which I think meant yes. I then went to the tallest chap, who was a dead ringer for Ian Lavender — he didn't have a muffler on — and said, You are to progress across the stage until you are level with the conductor, which will indicate you are in the centre of the stage, and you are to stay there. And I then went to the other little boy at the very far end and said, you will be the last onto the stage, and you have got to get onto the stage and be opposite the microphone on your side of the orchestra pit, even if that means pushing the people in front of you. And I then addressed the whole group and said, I know that dressing is the way to get equal spaces, but there won't be room to do that. You will just have to shuffle a bit. I think that caused a look of pain to go across my ADC's face, but he was kind enough not to say anything. I took them to the steps at side stage, and as the standard bearers were being helped up from the auditorium to make their tableau, this long line walked across the back. In their ill-assorted uniforms, it looked splendid, and it was like having a screen behind the banner tableau. I heaved a sigh of relief and sent up a silent prayer of thanks, at which point my ADC tapped me on the shoulder and said, well done, Ma'am. The whole event was well done. It was a fitting tribute to say thank you. Today is another occasion to say thank you. We won't all be at Buxton Opera House or in a street party, but we can all say thank you in our hearts in the difficult time that we're now in, and to echo both Vera Lynn and the Queen, we'll meet again. And I shall come and talk to you again sometime. I hope you enjoy listening. Bye-bye.